Best of r/malicious compliance episode 58. Subscribe for Reddit videos daily. I was waiting to pick up my order from a restaurant at the airport. The man in front of me was handed a small iced tea, and angrily snapped at the server that he had ordered a large. So she just dumped the entire drink into a large cup, filled the rest up with ice, put on a new lid, and handed it back to him. Thank you. Next. This is a short one, but the only instance of malicious compliance in my 20-year career as a nuclear electrician in the US Navy. The carrier was in a refueling overhaul and I was studying for quals in the lounge outside my division office. My division officer walked out of the office, paused and said, "Petty Officer Jaeger 6404, get some paint and cover that." I looked around to see what he was talking about and noticed that someone had taken a white marker or paint pen and written FTN in foot-high letters on the grey locker behind me. While those letters could mean almost anything, in this context they were almost certainly a disgruntled sailor expressing his frustration by graffitiing an acronym for Fck the Navy on the wall. Yes, sir. At this point I was a little disgruntled myself for having to take time away from my quals to fix someone else's problem. I went and got some paint and brushes and painted over the graffiti. An hour later he wandered back through and I showed him the work I had done, to which he responded, "Ha, ha, very fking funny, now fix it." Before it had been a foot-high FTN and 1/8 inches white paint on a grey background. Now it was a foot-high FTN in inch-wide black paint. Yes, sir. This time I painted a block of grey paint over it. It didn't exactly match the original color of the locker, but the graffiti wasn't visible, which is what he had wanted in the first place but hadn't specified. Thank you. Next. About 14 years ago when I was an 11-year-old kid I liked to climb on stuff. The higher the better. And if my friends joined, even better. Hanging out on places where no one would find you. One day, during lunch break on school me and my friends decided to climb on the school gym, a building of about 10 meters high. I was the first of the group to climb to the top. Since it was a drain pipe we went one by one. Since it was during break time all the kids were outside and we drew quite a crowd. When I eventually reached the top there was cheering and I felt like a king. But right after that came a loud horrifying shout. The janitor who noticed me climbing up stood there and was shouting that I should get down immediately. Me, a not so clever 11-year-old boy full of adrenaline of the climb, did what he said. I immediately went down. This time not via the drain pipe, but by jumping off the roof. I fell down 10 meters breaking both my ankles. First of all I felt nothing, stood up tried to walk it off like a cool kid, only to fall to the ground several moments later crying my eyes out. I had to spend about 6 weeks in a wheelchair. Had to spend 2 more years at that school to be known as the boy who jumped off the roof, and a janitor who was traumatized because I listened to him. I learned my lesson and haven't climbed buildings since. Thank you. Next. I applied to a full-time opening at a company, but for reasons they wanted to bring me in as a contractor for a while until a different position opened. I would be reporting to Joe in a department I didn't really care for, but it was alright as a temporary situation. Well, it turns out Joe was a reasonably nice person, but not such a great project manager. He staked his role at the company on our team delivering a certain major project on time. The problem was that a series of miscalculations meant we weren't able to even start working on it until halfway through the implementation phase. A schedule slipped and upper management expressed their disappointment. Joe became much less pleasant to be around. He yelled at good people for no reason, had a terrible attitude, and generally made life miserable for everyone in our workroom. Now, I was the sole contractor in that department full of salaried employees. Early on, Joe would all but push me out the door as my time card rolled over from 39.9 to 40.0 hours, as his budget had zero room for paying me for 41 hours a week. Even worse, that would pay the same as 41.5 hours, because I was subject to time and a half overtime rules. As crunch time turned into a death march, Joe made announcements like no one's going home until this is done, and scheduled to have breakfast and supper brought into the office every day. I asked Joe if this included me, and he said yes, of course, and he was surprised I had the nerve to ask. Okay then. It almost killed us. There was shouting and literally tears. We were all near breaking point. Well, most of us. I was in a great mood. As rough and emotionally fraught as it was, we got the project done. We were heroes. And a Sunday dinner at our desks came and went. Joe thanked me in particular for my great attitude. BNW. I really appreciate your hard work with a smile during this tough time. That's when I reminded him, hey, I clocked an extra 61 hours of overtime this week. I'm thrilled I could help. Joe damn near had a stroke and I found myself standing outside waiting for my bus like 2 minutes later. He was pissed, but couldn't really say anything because I had asked him if I had to stay and he explicitly told me that I did. It worked out great for everyone in the long term. Blown budget or not, Joe looked good for getting the project done. The CEO liked my can-do attitude and transferred me into a full-time dream job. And that paycheck? Getting paid Silicon Valley hourly rates for 131, 5 hours, 40 and 61 x1. 5. Bought a very nice vacation for my family. Thanks, Joe. I'm available to work all-nighters anytime you want to pay for them. Thank you. Next. This is a story my dad told me the other day and I thought I would share here. My dad has been working for the same company for about 30 plus years now. My dad is extremely smart. I don't say that lightly. When he was 3 years old, yes, 3 years old, he rewired my grandmother's toaster oven when it broke. He graduated high school early and has always excelled in mathematics, physics, and most tech-related areas. My dad began working for Company X after finishing his associate's degree. He was taking some time off before going back to school as he and my mom had just got married and he needed money. So my dad began working in Company X's printing press room as he did not have the academic credentials to apply for the job he really wanted at the time. This company printed everything from books to magazine, newspapers and the like. According to my dad, he actually really enjoyed working in the press room. It was a lot of manual labor and he was stuck on second shift, but he really liked his co-workers and he enjoyed learning about the machines they used, as well as how to run and repair them. My dad has a great work ethic. He always works hard, as did most of his co-workers. Apparently, the management at the time was kind of shitty. My dad had been working at the job for several months when he got the flu. He was informed by a co-worker that while they were able to call out sick, it would count against them when it was time for reviews. It was clearly an unfair and ridiculous rule. So my dad came into work the next day with a fever and nausea. He carried around a trash can with him for most of the day. It was a long and brutal shift and he was thrilled to finally leave. By the time he left though, everyone on second shift had been exposed to the flu as well as everyone coming in for third shift. The company ended up having to shut down the printing press for almost a whole week because nearly every press room worker was sick with the flu. While I'm not sure my dad had planned such a glorious outcome, he was very smug telling me this story and said he would do it again. My dad went back to school and finished his degree and got a job much higher in the company and now has quite a few people working beneath him. He never gives his employees a hard time about taking sick days. Thank you. Next. I have 2 part-time jobs as a library assistant for 2 separate libraries in my area. The first one is one of the best jobs I've ever had. It's a small library but super fun. Love my co-workers and my trustees are usually pretty cool. The second one, well, it's a larger library. My co-workers are super nice but one of my trustees does not like me. I've been here almost a year and she seems like she is out to get me. Well, yesterday kind of proved it. So one of our most frequently broken rules is that you're not allowed to eat in the library. You can have food in the conference room if there is an event or your staff. Here's the problem. I only work solo shifts and the conference room is on the exact opposite side of the library. Seriously, the front desk is in the front left side of the building and the conference room is the back right side. So if I go to eat my dinner and there and a patron, how we refer to customers because they don't really purchase anything, comes in, then it takes me a minute to reach them or I risk them having to come find me because I didn't hear the bell on the door. So typically I eat my dinner at the desk for maximum customer service. My boss, head librarian, understands this and has no problem with this as long as I clean up. Well, yesterday one of my favorite patrons came in. He is super nice and owns an old-fashioned candy shop up the road now. He's tried to tip me before but I have told him I can't because I'll get in trouble, so the last couple times he has been in he has given me a candy bar as a thank you. Sometimes it'll be one he made. His caramel pretzels are amazing. but sometimes he just brings me a Snickers or something. He will only bring me the pretzels and homemade stuff if they're fresh. Seriously, he makes the pretzels by hand and everything. Well, yesterday I helped him out and per usual he gives me a huge crispy hot chocolate because Valentine's is coming up and he knows I'm quirky and love holidays. I come to work every day wearing a crocheted burger hat that my mom made me and typically a nerdy dress or shirt. I'm not the kind of person who hides my geekiness. So he leaves and I sit at the desk to eat my candy, one happy little nerd, when in comes my trusty, who we will now refer to as entitled woman. I've just taken a large bite of my candy when she comes in and turns to the desk where I'm sitting and levels me with her glare and a smile worthy of a Batman villain because she thinks she's got me. Entitled woman, what are you doing? Me. After swallowing my chocolate, oh, I finished putting the books away and I was just about. Entitled woman, you can't eat out here. You have to eat in the conference room, it's policy. Me. Internally going WTF, it's just a candy bar. Entitled woman, are you arguing with me? All food must be eaten in the conference room, it's policy. Me. But I eat at the desk all the time. Sue, head librarian, not a real name, said it was okay because I work alone and that way I'm not running from the other side of the library. Entitled woman, you've done this before? Me. Yes. Sue knows. Entitled woman, well then. She sounds totally offended and walks off to find a book and I think it's over. If it were over, would I be here? I come in the next afternoon to find a written warning from her and Sue. Sue apologized and said she has to sign it to show it's been seen and dealt with and tells me not to worry too much about it. Oh no, I'm not worried about it, I'm so mad. Well, I began to sit and stew about this until I saw the note about the trustee meeting tomorrow night. Dew leaves me a note to remind me every month so I know that I can't get to the microwave in the conference room and to bring a sandwich instead of something hot. I'm fairly mischievous and my dad is the king of malicious compliance, so I know exactly what I have to do. So last night, before I come and I get all the fixing stuff from the grocery store to make loaded nachos for dinner, chili, cheese, the works. So I get into work and the trustee meeting has just started and I know entitled woman has a big presentation for the meeting, so I sit and wait. When I start to get hungry, I politely knock on the conference room door and enter. Entitled woman had just started her presentation. Me. Sorry to interrupt, I just need to make dinner since I'm not allowed to eat at the desk. Sue immediately clues into what's about to happen and shakes her head with a smile. I take it as my go ahead for what I'm doing. Entitled woman, whatever, just hurry up. So I go to the microwave and start my work. You heat up the chili first and while that's cooking in our very loud microwave I start fussing with the chips, making as much racket as I can, and even though I have my back to her I can feel the glare. Once my chili is done I out the nachos in and microwave those next while mixing in some chopped peppers from the supermarket with the chili for a bit of extra crunch. Nachos beep loudly and I take them out. Whoops, not enough cheese and not melted enough. Add more and in they go. This goes on a bit and I finally am done with my nachos. Entitled woman is fuming at how loud I am and it doesn't stop there. I sit in her vacant seat next to Sue, who is red in the face trying not to laugh, and I then start eating my nachos. So they're loud and crunchy as it is, but I typically don't eat crunchy food because I'm a loud chewer due to a click in my jaw from an old injury, so it's extra loud and annoying. Entitled woman is red with anger and I just sit happily eating the sweetest nachos I've ever tasted until EW's presentation is over and my plate is empty. I clean the dishes and go back to the desk with a smug grin. Fast forward to today when I come in and Sue tells me that from now on the trustees would prefer me to eat my dinner at the front desk. Victory. TLDR. Trustee complains about me eating at the front, so I loudly crunch my way through her entire presentation. Thanks for reading. Anyone who might want to use this in a video is welcome to, as long as they link me. Edit. Holy crap, this blew up. Thanks for the awards, guys. Someone had mentioned getting the policy changed and we are having our start of the year policy meeting in a few weeks. I'll make sure to talk to Sue about editing the policy. Thanks so much. Edit 2. Talk to Sue. She told me that the food policy was going to be updated and wants to sit down with me to work out the food bit with her and my co-worker so that we can all make sure the new policy is to all of our satisfaction. I know you guys aren't happy with Sue, but who do you think explained to the trustees why quiet little Lachlan Immonwood was so rude and chomped through the meeting? Because as we all know with Karens, it certainly wasn't entitled woman. I'm also totally dreading the fact that I kind of forgot that once the next trustees meeting comes up I'll be requesting a small amount of money to do a Dungeons and Dragons program, and it's something they have to vote on it, else I'll have to go to our friends if the library group, a group of patrons who donate a large sum of money to help our librarians fund programs they believe in that the trustees do not. So potential part 2? Perhaps? I'll update when I find out. Thank you. Next. I think this might be a stretch, but I really can't think of a subreddit where this would fit, and I wanted to tell it. My uncle's neighbors really hate him for literally no reason, and one day he walked into his garden to find 3 plastic bags, the heavy duty ones you get dog food / cattle feed in, lying on his lawn. And he knew immediately where they were from since he only has one neighbor, and the bags looked as if they had lazily been thrown over the shared fence. 2 of the bags were filled with leaf litter and the other was full of apples that looked like they had been slightly eaten by worms. Obviously the neighbors didn't want to eat them. My uncle, let's call him Flea, does all sorts of gardening in his spare time, and he thought that the neighbors threw him their waste stuff for him to use. So he went round to their house and asked if they were the ones who threw him the leaf litter and the apples. They shut the door in his face without answering. And at this point Flea realized they did it maliciously because they couldn't be bothered to take their waste anywhere. Most of you probably know that leaf litter is great for keeping soil healthy, and my uncle realizes this too, and decides to make compost from the leaves to use for his onions. He grows large onions for an annual competition. Don't ask. After he has a bag full of his homemade leaf litter fertilizer, he waits until one of the neighbors leaves for work, then goes out into his front garden and makes a big deal of spreading the fertilizer in front of the neighbor, exaggerating every slight movement and noise. With the apples, however, he decided to make, in combination with his own apples, some sort of beer/wine/cider hybrid, and he also made sure that at least one of the neighbors saw him using their apples throughout the process. The drink was pretty good in the end, if not a bit strong. The icing on the cake for me though, is when he neatly folded up the plastic bags and left them piled in the neighbor's garden with a rock on top of them, in which he etched the word more.